The idea of immortal shapeshifters has fascinated us for generations. Are these stories new though, or have these monsters been stalking our nightmares for centuries? Vampires seem to have been around for a long time. In 2014, a skeleton was discovered in Poland that had a rock jammed into its mouth and a wooden stake driven through its thigh. The 16th century skeleton had a rock pushed into its mouth so hard it had broken some of its teeth, and the stake was to stop the corpse rising from its grave. The corpse was also laid in its grave facing east instead of the more usual west-facing burial. This is far from the only example of what are called deviant burials. A 13th century grave in Bulgaria was occupied by a man aged between 40 and 50 who had a 2-pound piece of iron hammered through his chest hard enough to break bones, because vampires couldn't tolerate iron. "200 miles east, still in Bulgaria, were found 2 more graves known as the twin vampires of Sozopol. These belong to the 14th century, but one has a piece of iron that probably came from a ploughshare driven through its left rib cage. The other had metal pushed into its solar plexus. Archaeologists believe these were graves of those feared to be vampires, iron driven through their bodies to prevent them from rising from their graves. What links these burials is a complete departure from normal Christian treatment of the dead, and the phenomenon wasn't confined to the continent. Deviant burials have been found all over Britain too. In Southwell in Nottinghamshire, an Anglo-Saxon graveyard dated to somewhere between 550 and 700 AD threw up one particularly interesting grave. In one trench there were around 30 Christian burials aligned east-west. In another, to the east, were the jumbled remains of up to a dozen individuals described as disarticulated, not intact skeletons. There was one exception, a complete skeleton that seemed to be outside the bounds of the graveyard, with iron nails through its shoulders, heart and ankles. These kinds of burials are often speculated to belong to those who died an unnatural death, or who it was feared might rise from the grave. Whatever we may believe, it's clear that some during the medieval period were worried about the deceased rising from their graves at night and terrorising the local community, and they took steps to keep those they feared might be vampires in their graves. Medieval manuscripts are littered with marginal images of unusual races, from the one-legged monopods to the long-eared panotti. We can see people musing on stories of strange variations of the human race that might be found in other parts of the world. Dogheads, people with the head of a dog, are common too. Do they speak to a medieval fear of werewolves? An early 11th century law code of the Danish King of England, Canute, seeks to ensure that the madly audacious werewolf do not widely devastate nor bite too many of the spiritual flock. There's a strong possibility that the term werewolf, literally meaning wolfman, is applied here to mean an outlaw, but there is evidence of belief in what we would recognise as werewolves or lycanthropes. As early as the 11th century, the Scandinavian werewolf legends were moving east and south as Vikings settled in Kievan Rus. The Belarusian ruler, Vasilav of Polotsk, was thought to have been a werewolf, prowling the night in the form of a wolf. By the 16th century, werewolf tales were becoming mixed in with the hysteria that led to witch hunts and trials. There's evidence from before the medieval period that lasts throughout that some believe these stories related to a form of melancholy or mania, that this was a mental rather than physical affliction. The 14th century writer Johannes Actuarius described the condition like this: lycanthropy is a kind of melancholy, making the affected person wander at night time, visiting the tombs and the deserts like wolves, and come back in the morning as their human figure and stay at home. In any case, they have ulcerated legs and feet because of falls on stones and thorns. They have dry eyes and tongue and feeble vision. Some patients fear death, while others desire it. Harald I, portrayed in some sagas as the first king of Norway in the 9th and 10th centuries, is noted as having Ulfhednar among his army. Berserkers were associated with the bear, and the Ulfhednar shared many of their characteristics of brutal fury on the battlefield that made them appear impervious to pain. They would wear wolf pelts and are associated with Odin. Were these fierce warriors the root of the myth that men could actually transform into wolves to savagely attack others? Zombie isn't a word that's used during the medieval period, but there are references to revenants, reanimated corpses. Imagine how a woman felt 800 years ago when she awoke in the middle of the night to find she was being suffocated beneath the bloated corpse of her recently deceased husband. According to William of Newburgh, writing in the 12th century, this is what happened to one poor widow. He records the story, amongst others, of the recently dead terrorising their community and visiting horrified loved ones. In William's tale, the widow appeals to the church for help, and the Bishop of Lincoln writes a letter to the local archdeacon absolving him of any sin in investigating the deceased's body. When they opened the grave, the corpse was there precisely as it had been buried. The archdeacon put the bishop's letter on the man's chest, and the visitations stopped immediately. The letter is a singular response. Most often the advice was to dig up the body and burn it to end the visits of the revenant. One account makes it seem like it was a torment for the reanimated corpse too. One of William of Newburgh's stories is of a man repeatedly telling people how to stop him. William wrote, "For this monster, while it was being animated, as it is said, by Satan, it is said to have told certain people that they would not have any peace so long as he was unburned." Clearly, he wanted an end to his zombie nightmare too. Belief in resurrected bodies isn't so strange for the medieval period. The church taught that Jesus rose again, but also that people would be resurrected on the day of judgment. These stories must have felt like something had gone wrong with that accepted truth, doubtless due to the work of the devil. So there are three staples of modern horror: vampires, werewolves and zombies. All are firmly present in medieval writing and thought, even if they appeared in a slightly different form than we usually think of them now. The history of the supernatural is long and mysterious. Sleep tight and don't let the revenants bite.
Welcome to the History Hit YouTube channel. Hope you enjoyed that video.
And if you'd like to see more videos where we attempt to try and bring history to life, please don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell.
Cheers guys, see you soon.